Boulevard St-Laurent, the most famous street in Montreal. Neither exclusively French nor English, St-Laurent is a third city in Montreal, a haven for old and new immigrants, a little Babylon with its dozens of tongues. Known simply as the Main to locals, St-Laurent was once the wickedest street in Montreal, a boulevard of crime that drew Americans fleeing prohibition, gangsters fleeing the law, and bohemians seeking to reinvent themselves. The Main, a place where saints and sinners, peddlers and pleasure seekers have come to enjoy the good life. Montreal, the second largest French-speaking city in the world, with 2 official and countless unofficial languages. At its heart is Boulevard Saint-Laurent, or St. Lawrence Boulevard to the English, neatly slicing the city and its cultures in half, the French to the east, the English to the west. Between the two, the Main is a melting pot of old Europe and new France. Saint-Laurent begins its 10-kilometer northward journey at the old port on the banks of the St. Lawrence River. The old city of Montreal was built here, contained in fortifications to protect inhabitants from recurring Indian raids. The city's first residents were French priests and fur traders who came to convert the largely Iroquois and Huron nations to Christianity and capitalism. The New World offered abundant riches to the French, and King Louis XIV enlisted the help of the Catholic Church to make a colony out of an outpost. Hundreds of young French women, mostly orphans and street girls, were promised free passage to New France as brides for the colony's bachelors. The king offered a pension of £300 to any girl who would bear 10 live children. Many of these filles de roi, or king's daughters, arrived here in Old Montreal in the late 1600s. For 2 centuries, Saint-Laurent was the main route for newcomers to the city. Loyalists fleeing the American Revolution, Scottish trade merchants, and Irish laborers. Today, this section of the Lower Main at La Gauchetière Street marks the entrance to Montreal's Chinatown. But in the mid-1800s, the area was known as Little Dublin. The Main was rapidly evolving into a cosmopolitan highway, neither French nor English, but a third city in Montreal, a city of immigrants.
They used to say that Montreal was famous for 2 things: a tavern on one corner and a church on the other. But they forgot to say one word: a synagogue in the middle of the block. In this area, that's what it was.
Marvin Burson's family settled on the Main in 1922.
This was the Jewish ghetto. Everybody here was in the same class. There was no such thing as a kid going to school who had to wear clothes to match his peers, because they all wore the same clothes. Everybody was poor. Everybody worked to make a living. The factories, the sweatshops were all down here on the Main. This is where you either got started or you finished. One of the two.
Jewish immigrants first came to the Main, fleeing the pogroms in Eastern Europe in the 1880s. These Yiddish-speaking refugees landed in the port of Montreal and quickly realized that Saint-Laurent was a street like no other. Some set up little stores, selling everything from buttons and ribbons to delicacies from the old country. Others went to work for the garment manufacturers on Lower St-Laurent. Here was a frontier zone between French and English, a political no man's land that was safe for Jews and any other foreigner. By the late 1830s, English-speaking residents outnumbered the French. Montreal had become a city of two cultures and two languages, and Boulevard St-Laurent was claimed by both. Worried by the growing English encroachment, the French elite erected a monument to their culture, the Monument National, at the corner of Place du Marché and Lower St-Laurent. Built in 1893, this grand structure was touted as the largest and most innovative theater in the country, seating 1,200 people. City planners had a vision of Montreal as the Paris of North America, and the monument was to be the jewel in the crown of French culture. But the theater proved too large and too expensive for the French-Canadian community to maintain. Although France's little sparrow Edith Piaf did perform here in 1948, by then it was too late. Instead, the Monument National became a monument to a cross-section of cultural amusements, including a Yiddish theater troupe, the Chinese opera, and even a wax museum. By the early 20th century, both the French and English establishment abandoned Saint-Laurent. Other immigrant communities began settling on the Main. Greeks, Portuguese, and a strong Italian community who moved from Lower to Upper Saint-Laurent, creating their own little Italy around Rue Jean Talon, including the popular Marché Jean Talon, the largest farmers' market in the city. Food is a major feature of the Main, and walking up Saint-Laurent is like checking out the international delicacies on a 10-kilometer-long buffet. Imported European meats and cheeses are across the street from the authentically French Boulangerie Saint-Laurent, a favorite on the Main for decades. But the best-known eatery of them all is Schwartz's, famous for its smoked meat, with a cherry coke, fries, and pickles on the side, if you want the real Montreal experience. The meat comes in 3 grades of fat, but if the grease doesn't trickle down your chin, they say, it's not a good sandwich. On the Main, there are traditions, and then there are secrets. The most guarded of which is Schwartz's Romanian recipe for smoked meat, handed down to the current owner, Frank Silva.
This is the raw brisket that's been marinating for 10 days in our secret blends of spices. This is our smoked meat, finished product. It's been in the oven since approximately 6:30 this morning, and it's all ready to be brought up front, steamed, and served.
Rumor has it competing delis have had Schwartz's meat analyzed for its secret ingredients. So far, no one has cracked the code. Schwartz's sells over 5,000 pounds of smoked meat a week, and there's rarely an hour when the deli isn't literally a crush of customers from across the city. Another landmark in the heart of the Main is Warshaw's, a popular discount emporium that flogs everything from furnishings to food. Helen Levy is the daughter of the original owners.
One day, a painter walked through on the street with a brush and a bucket of paint, and he came in and said to my father, "Would you like to have your name painted in front of the store?" And then he asked my father, "What's your name?" My father said, "Florkovich." He says, "Florkovich, how do you spell it?" And my father, he couldn't read or write. He says, "I'm sorry, I don't know how to spell it." He says, "Write Warsaw. That's where I come from, and I'm sure you know how to spell that." And sure enough, that's how our name came about. And it's the Maine that really put us on the map.
Montreal has always been a city of nocturnal pleasure, a legacy that goes back to the 1920s, when it boasted some of the best clubs and cabarets in North America. The city's reputation as a wide-open town in an otherwise straight-laced Canada was well established south of the border. When America went dry in 1920, the Maine saw an influx of a different kind of immigrant, one with more money and a thirst for whiskey and gin. American entertainers like Texas Guinan, a star of the New York club scene, came north to cash in on the migrating clientele.
Art is really the sugar coating on the cake of trouble, and many a sucker has cut himself too big a piece of cake. You understand?
"Hello, suckers," was her trademark greeting as she welcomed revelers, sporting a necklace of gold padlocks from every bar she had worked in New York that was shut down. Guinan was hostess of the Frolics Cabaret, the first major nightclub to open on the Lower Main. Today, the Frolics is the Manhattan, a popular Latin dance club that heats up after midnight on weekends. But in the 1920s, this former fur warehouse was legendary for its live bands, exotic dancers, and free-flowing booze, including magnums of champagne at $15 a pop. In 1933, Prohibition came to an end, and the American cash and clientele left the Maine. Texas Guinan beat a hasty retreat, but not before earning the title Queen of the Maine. The Maine continued to be a mecca for social misfits and developed a reputation as the Boulevard of crime.
There was the English mobs, the Irish, the Jewish, and they tended to be in control on the west side of the city, that is, west of St-Laurent. On the east side of the city were the French Canadians and the Italians. If there were problems, they were solved one way or another, perhaps frowned upon by society, but they had their way of settling their accounts, as police like to say.
Norm Olson grew up around the Maine and covered the area as a newspaper and press agent. In the 1940s and 50s, the Lower Maine was a potent combination of high life and low life. Well-known racketeers opened nightclubs, illegal gambling joints, and brothels on and around St-Laurent. The police turned a blind eye and pocketed the profits.
The fact is that they looked the other way in exchange for monetary gain, but at the same time, these criminals provided a certain amount of protection for the citizens, believe it or not. When you had hoodlums who were sort of renegade types, they made sure to keep them in line in exchange for being allowed to run gambling and after-hours drinking places and things like that. And of course, money always changed hands.
Just off Saint-Laurent on St. Catherine, the Théâtre du Nouveau Monde was once the Gaiety, the most famous burlesque house in the city. And in the 1940s, the star attraction was Lily St-Cyr, Montreal's most famous femme fatale. St-Cyr poked fun at conventional moralities. She cleverly circumvented a law against stripping by appearing nude on stage and then getting dressed. For many Montrealers, going to see Lily was a rite of passage. At her peak, Lily St-Cyr was a sensation from New York to Vegas and earned $10,000 a week to dance 30 minutes a day. In Montreal, local priests tried to run her out of town to make an example of her as a corrupting influence. St-Cyr was arrested, but none of her opponents had actually seen her dance, and the charges were dropped. Overnight, Lily St-Cyr was celebrated as a national treasure. In 1954, Montreal's era of permissiveness came under attack with the election of Jean Drapeau as mayor. Drapeau promised reform and a crackdown on the organized crime rings that had gripped the city. An invigorated morality squad set about cleaning up St-Laurent. Drapeau fired police officers, uprooted corrupt officials on the take, and literally demolished criminal hangouts on the Main. Today, vacant lots on Lower St-Laurent are a reminder of Drapeau's bulldozing ways. Although the street has had many facelifts, this section of St-Laurent is a tawdry reminder of its former glory. Transients and bohemians continue to migrate here, drawn to the street's permissive atmosphere. In the late 1950s, a young poet named Leonard Cohen gravitated to the bistros and bars around the Lower Main. He read love poems accompanied by a jazz ensemble and was hailed as a nightclub poet in the new beat tradition. In the seedy, Tenderloin district of Montreal, a star was born.
During the day I laugh, and during the night I sleep. My favorite cooks prepare my meals, my body cleans and repairs itself, and all my work goes well.
Cohen found success abroad, but he returned to Montreal and lived here, across from this park just off the Main, in the 1970s and 80s. The artist became a fixture in the neighborhood and later claimed the city as an early muse. Two very different writers who drew their inspiration directly from the Main are novelist Mordecai Richler and playwright Michel Tremblay. Tremblay's work, such as Les Berceurs, brought to life working-class French Canadians who lived in the tenement houses east of the Main. Richler, on the other hand, chronicled Jewish life west of the Main in his novels like The Apprenticeship of Dodi Kravitz. For Jewish children such as Richler, a streetcar ride along the Main promised a carnival of pinball machines and striptease movies. For the oppressed women in Tremblay's plays, the streetcar was an endless ride past the Jewish merchants to whom they owed money. Tremblay also documented the demi-monde of the Main itself, prostitutes, thieves, and transvestites. His characters were so evocative that the playwright transformed the image of the street from the city's shameful underbelly into the tattered heart of Montreal. Today on the Lower Main, nighthawks continue to populate the street, frequently indulging in a classic Montreal late-night snack, a steamé, or steamed hot dog with a side of fries. But the serious nightlife on St-Laurent has moved 10 blocks uphill to an area Montrealers call the Plateau. In the grand tradition of the Main, the street is reinventing itself once again. For any Montrealer who wants to travel with the in crowd, St-Laurent is the place to be. The street's bars, classy pool halls, trendy cafes, and 24-hour eateries attract hip young night crawlers looking for a fun night out. On weekends, visitors from other cities hours away come to town just to be part of the St-Laurent scene. One of the more popular bars on the street is Le Swimming. Maurice Holder was the first club owner to set up shop here, and Le Swimming, his latest club, has just celebrated its 10th anniversary on the street.
I think nightclubs can be a huge motor in changing or starting up a street or creating energy in an area.
The club is a clever nod to the pool halls and nightclubs of old, reviving the street's reputation as an entertainment hotspot. Other clubs followed its lead, including the Lounge A Go-Go further up St-Laurent. Patrons willingly line up to gain entry to this retro 60s bar, where the waitresses are even more fabulous than the clientele, returning a long-lost aura of glamour to the Main. But die-hard locals still poke fun at the street's nouveau riche arriviste. An upscale addition is Buenos, an Italian eatery that specializes in nouvelle cuisine. The restaurant's main claim to fame is its celebrity clientele, and its walls boast the doodles of megawatt stars like Robert De Niro, Jim Carrey, and Bono from U2. Developers are beginning to cash in on Saint-Laurent's unique appeal, and the abundance of cheap lofts, many of them abandoned garment factories, have also attracted young, successful Montrealers who have revitalized Saint-Laurent's eclectic urban scene. Andre Milton is a 25-year-old software designer and composer.
I've worked in New York, in other cities in Canada, and Europe. The rhythm in Montreal is different from elsewhere. The mix of the cultures, the spirit, the joie de vivre. We work when we have to work. We also create beautiful things and have wonderful programmers, graphic artists, and musicians. But they know how to enjoy life.
Lower Saint-Laurent is now gaining a reputation as a thriving center for new media, including a state-of-the-art cinema called Excentrique.
Deux billets pour Dancer in the Dark, s'il vous plaît.
Featuring several theaters, including one that converts into a studio in less than an hour. Each chair costs $500 to wire with cutting-edge digital, visual, and audio technology, designed to eventually receive images directly from the internet.
Limited technology. Limited technology.
On Saint-Laurent, there are dozens of aspiring entrepreneurs hoping to strike it rich. And alongside those seeking fame and fortune are the remaining small family business owners and restaurateurs who are loyal to the Main and the good life it has given them. Montreal's Boulevard Saint-Laurent is a street of contrasts and contradictions, from high life to street life. This is the Main, a place where the old world and the new embrace.